Today's story, The Great Bank Robbery Escape. The small town of Crescent Falls had always been a picture of tranquility. Nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, it was a place where life moved slowly and predictably. The main street was lined with quaint shops, a single diner, and a modest bank that had served the community for decades. The townsfolk went about their days with a quiet confidence, secure in the belief that their peaceful existence was unshakable. On a crisp autumn morning, the bank's manager, Edward Thompson, was already at his desk. The sun streamed through the large windows of Crescent Falls Bank, casting a warm glow over the polished mahogany furniture and the neatly arranged stacks of financial documents. Edward was methodically checking accounts and preparing for the day's transactions. To him, it was just another routine day in a routine town, but as Edward glanced out of his office window, he noticed something unusual: a sleek, black sedan parked outside the bank, its engine idling. The car looked out of place in a town where most vehicles were old pickups and family sedans. Edward shrugged off the uneasy feeling and returned to his work. At precisely 10 a.m., the bank's front door opened with a soft chime, and a man in a tailored suit entered. His appearance was impeccably polished, with a neat tie and a pair of sunglasses that shielded his eyes. He carried himself with an air of quiet authority. The man was James Walker, but to everyone in Crescent Falls, he was just another stranger passing through. James approached the front desk, where the bank teller, a young woman named Emily Carter, greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir. How can I assist you today?" James returned her smile with a practiced charm. "Good morning. I'm here to discuss some private banking matters. Is Mr. Thompson available?" Emily nodded and picked up the phone to call Edward. "Mr. Thompson, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says he has private banking inquiries." Edward, curious but unperturbed, motioned for the man to follow him into his office. "Please, come in." James entered, his demeanor relaxed. Edward gestured to a chair across from his desk. "How can I help you today, Mr. Walker?" James finished for him, settling into the chair with an air of ease. James Walker. "I'm here on a business matter. I've recently acquired some property in the area and am looking into financial services." Edward nodded, pulling out a file. "Very well. We can discuss our services and see what might fit your needs." As they talked, James's calm and polished exterior concealed a meticulously crafted plan. Underneath the suit and charm, he was a seasoned bank robber, and this visit was just part of his elaborate scheme. The true nature of his visit was far from the innocent inquiry Edward believed it to be. Unbeknownst to Edward and the rest of Crescent Falls, James Walker had been carefully studying the bank's routines, security measures, and employee schedules for weeks. Every detail had been noted, every weakness assessed. His plan was intricate, involving precise timing and the element of surprise. Meanwhile, outside the bank, 2 more individuals in casual clothing loitered near the front of the building. They were David and Laura Mitchell, a married couple who seemed like ordinary tourists. In reality, they were James's accomplices, ready to execute their roles in the heist. David carried a seemingly harmless camera, which was actually a sophisticated device for scanning the bank's security codes and alarms. Laura, dressed in a simple but elegant dress, played the part of an innocent bystander who would create distractions at the right moment. Back inside the bank, James continued to engage Edward in conversation. The discussion was technical, focusing on various financial products and services. To Edward, it seemed like a normal business meeting. However, James's mind was focused on the moment when he would signal his accomplices to set their plan into motion. The minutes ticked by, and as the clock approached 10:30 a.m., James excused himself from Edward's office. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Thompson. I'll think over our discussion and get back to you." With that, James left the office and walked back to the main area of the bank. He nodded to Emily and left the building, his footsteps echoing in the quiet space. As he exited, he caught a glimpse of David and Laura moving into position, ready to put their part of the plan into action. Outside, James slipped into the black sedan, where he sat and waited for the signal. The calm before the storm was almost over. The carefully orchestrated plan was about to unfold, and Crescent Falls would soon be thrust into a situation that would challenge its peaceful facade. James glanced at his watch, timing every detail with precision. It was just a matter of moments before the town's routine would be shattered, and the heist would begin. As the sun continued its ascent in the sky, the tranquility of Crescent Falls was about to be replaced by the chaos of a well-executed robbery. The first act of the heist was set to begin, and James Walker was ready to see his plan come to fruition. The clock on the wall of Crescent Falls Bank ticked steadily, marking the seconds until the meticulously planned heist would unfold. The quiet inside the bank was disrupted only by the occasional murmur of conversations and the soft rustling of papers. Outside, the crisp autumn air hinted at the change of seasons, a stark contrast to the tension building within the bank's walls. James Walker watched from the safety of his black sedan, the engine purring softly. He had meticulously timed every aspect of the plan, and now it was time for his accomplices to act. He glanced at his watch and saw that it was almost 10:30 a.m. The moment had arrived. At that precise moment, David Mitchell, with his seemingly innocuous camera in hand, strolled casually toward the bank's front entrance. He had already observed the bank's security features and was prepared for the task ahead. He nodded to Laura Mitchell, who was standing on the sidewalk, pretending to be absorbed in a phone call. Laura gave David a quick nod before continuing her act. Her distraction was crucial to ensure that the security guards and bank employees were focused on her rather than the more subtle actions taking place. David entered the bank, his camera clicking away, as he captured the serene ambience of the interior. To the casual observer, it appeared as if he was a tourist documenting a quaint small-town bank. However, his true purpose was to disable the security system. As he moved, he discreetly activated a small device hidden in the camera that emitted a signal to disrupt the bank's security network. Emily Carter, the young bank teller, noticed David's presence, but assumed he was just another customer. She greeted him with a friendly smile. "Welcome to Crescent Falls Bank. How can I help you today?" David responded with a casual tone. "Just taking some pictures for a project. Nothing too exciting. Can I get a shot of the lobby?" Emily nodded, a bit puzzled by his request but obliged. "Sure thing. Just be sure not to get in the way of the counters." David moved around, capturing various angles of the lobby while his device worked its magic. Within minutes, the bank's security system experienced a minor glitch, which caused a temporary, localized blackout in the camera feeds and alarm system. The system would reboot shortly, but by then, the critical phase of the heist would be in progress. Outside, Laura watched intently as the security systems inside the bank experienced their momentary disruption. The brief lapse was enough to trigger the next phase. She made her way to a nearby cafe and quietly sent a text message to James. "Ready for your signal." James's phone buzzed with the message, confirming that the first part of the plan was in motion. He carefully exited the sedan and approached the bank, his demeanor composed and purposeful. With a deep breath, he entered the bank and headed directly toward the lobby. Inside, James's sharp eyes scanned the surroundings. The security system's temporary malfunction had not yet been discovered by the bank staff, allowing him a critical window of opportunity. He made his way to the lobby, where he was met by Emily, who was now focused on handling David's request. "Mr. Walker," Emily greeted him with a smile. "Is there something I can assist you with?" James maintained his charming exterior. "Actually, I need to speak with Mr. Thompson about a few details. I believe he's expecting me." Emily checked her schedule and nodded. "He should be in his office. Let me call him." As Emily picked up the phone to notify Edward Thompson, James made his way toward the office, his heart racing, but his expression calm. The moment he stepped into Edward's office, the heist was set into motion. Edward looked up from his paperwork as James entered, his face showing a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Mr. Walker, back so soon?" James's smile was polite, but cold. "I'm afraid there's been a slight change of plans. I need to discuss something urgent with you." Edward's curiosity piqued. He gestured for James to sit. "Of course. What's this about?" While James engaged Edward in seemingly innocuous conversation, David moved to the rear of the bank, where he had positioned himself strategically. His role was to create further distractions and ensure that the employees and any potential customers remained occupied, As James kept Edward's attention focused on an elaborate but fabricated financial issue, David discreetly accessed the bank's service entrance, where he used a set of stolen keys to gain access to the restricted areas. The moment David was inside, he began working on disabling the vault's security system. Laura's role was equally crucial. From the cafe, she monitored the situation through a discreet earpiece and acted as a diversion. When she noticed any signs of suspicion or movement from the bank staff, she was ready to cause minor disruptions to keep the attention away from James and David. The tension in the bank was palpable. As James continued to chat with Edward, the bank's security system, which had been temporarily disabled, began to reboot. The alarms and cameras flickered back to life, but by now, David had already completed the critical steps necessary to bypass the vault's security. With the vault now vulnerable, David signaled to James. The final phase of the heist was underway. James's conversation with Edward reached a natural conclusion as he received the signal from David. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Thompson. I'll be in touch." James exited the office, rejoining David and Laura. As they moved toward the vault, their coordinated actions came together seamlessly. The small town of Crescent Falls was about to witness a heist that would change its tranquil image forever. The vault doors opened with a satisfying click, revealing the contents within. The heist was proceeding according to plan, but as the heist's final moments approached, the unexpected was always a possibility. With nerves of steel and a well-practiced plan, James and his team prepared for the final, high-stakes moments of their operation. As the clock ticked toward noon, Crescent Falls Bank was on the brink of a crisis that would test its serene reputation and the mettle of those within it. The crisp autumn air outside Crescent Falls Bank seemed a stark contrast to the tension inside. The heist was progressing as planned, but the clock was ticking, and the stakes were rising. James Walker and his accomplices, David and Laura Mitchell, were in the midst of executing their meticulously crafted plan. As James and David worked on the vault, Laura maintained her position in the cafe, keeping an eye on the bank's activities and ready to respond to any changes. The bank's lobby was still bustling with customers. Oblivious to the heist unfolding in the background, David had managed to bypass the vault's security system with surprising efficiency. The high-tech devices he had brought with him had successfully disabled the alarm and the electronic locks. As the vault door began to open, David's heart raced. The contents of the vault were now within reach, however, just as the door creaked open. An unexpected event unfolded. A bank customer named Mrs. Eleanor Parker, a sharp-eyed elderly woman known for her keen observations, noticed something amiss. She had been waiting in line and had seen David entering the restricted area. Her instincts told her something was wrong. Mrs. Parker approached Emily Carter, who was still busy handling David's request. "Excuse me, dear," Mrs. Parker said in a whisper. "I believe there's something odd going on. I saw that man go into a place he shouldn't be." Emily, preoccupied with her work, initially brushed off Mrs. Parker's concern. "I'm sure it's nothing. He's probably just taking care of something." But Mrs. Parker was insistent. "No, I saw him clearly. I think you should check on it." Emily finally relented and decided to investigate. She made her way toward the service entrance where David had entered. As she approached, her unease grew, and she picked up the phone to alert Edward Thompson. "Mr. Thompson, I think something's wrong. Please come to the service entrance immediately." Edward, who had been distracted by James's conversation, looked up in alarm. "What's happening?" Emily relayed the information, and Edward's face paled. "Stay put and don't confront anyone. I'm on my way." As Edward made his way toward the service entrance, James realized that their time was running out. He signaled to David, who was hurriedly stuffing cash into a duffel bag. "We need to move now. Something's going wrong." David's hands worked quickly, but just as he was about to finish, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Panic surged through him. "We've got company." Laura, who had been watching from the cafe, noticed Edward's hurried approach and realized that their cover was about to be blown. She had to act fast. She dashed out of the cafe and headed toward the bank, her heart pounding. Inside the bank, Emily continued to watch the restricted area, her anxiety growing. As she saw the door to the service entrance opening, she spotted David emerging, trying to look inconspicuous. But David's attempt to blend in failed. His nervousness was evident, and Emily's suspicion deepened. Edward arrived at the service entrance just as David was about to exit. "Stop right there," Edward commanded, his voice filled with authority. David froze, the duffel bag clutched tightly in his hands. He tried to maintain his composure, but the situation was spiraling out of control. Before he could react, Edward pulled out his phone and began calling for backup. At that moment, James, realizing that their plan was collapsing, made a split-second decision. He grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and prepared to create a diversion. With a swift move, he discharged the extinguisher, releasing a cloud of white powder that filled the room and obscured vision. The cloud of powder caused immediate chaos. Emily, caught off guard, stumbled backward, and David took advantage of the confusion to make a break for the exit. James, guiding David through the haze, led the way toward the back door. Laura, now inside the bank, saw the commotion and joined the fray. She expertly created further distractions, causing confusion among the bank staff and customers. The plan was falling apart, but they had to keep moving. As the powder began to settle, the bank's alarms blared, and the wail of sirens could be heard approaching in the distance. The police were on their way, and the situation was rapidly escalating. James, David, and Laura managed to exit the bank, their faces obscured by masks. They dashed toward the black sedan, their escape vehicle. The plan was in disarray, but they had one chance to evade capture. James took the wheel, his hands steady despite the chaos. David and Laura climbed into the vehicle, and as they sped away from the scene, the bank's facade was now a scene of confusion and urgency. As they raced through the streets of Crescent Falls, James could feel the weight of the heist bearing down on them. The unexpected twist had jeopardized their escape, and the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty. Their carefully orchestrated plan was now a frantic scramble for survival. The small town of Crescent Falls, once a picture of tranquility, was now the backdrop for a high-stakes chase. The heist was far from over, and the consequences of their actions were beginning to unfold. The black sedan roared down the winding roads of Crescent Falls, its tires screeching as James Walker navigated the narrow streets with skill and urgency. David and Laura Mitchell, still catching their breath from the chaotic escape, were seated in the back, their faces hidden behind masks. The peaceful town they had carefully infiltrated was now in a state of turmoil, with police sirens blaring and townspeople whispering anxiously about the robbery. "James, are we clear?" David asked, his voice tense. "How long until the cops catch up with us?" James's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "We need to lose them first. I've got a plan, but we have to act fast." Laura glanced out the window, her anxiety palpable. "They'll be looking for us everywhere. We need to find a place to lay low." James nodded, his eyes scanning the road ahead. "There's an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. If we can get there without being spotted, we might be able to regroup and figure out our next move." As they sped away from Crescent Falls, the sounds of sirens grew faint, but never disappeared entirely. The police were on their trail, and the small town's peaceful facade had been shattered by the heist. Inside the bank, the scene was chaotic. Edward Thompson, along with Emily Carter and a few other staff members, was trying to make sense of the situation. The fire extinguisher's powder had settled, but the impact of the robbery was still palpable. Police officers had begun their investigation, and the bank was swarming with law enforcement and forensic teams. Detective Sarah Collins, known for her sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of justice, arrived on the scene. She was a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving high-profile cases. As she stepped out of her car, her eyes quickly assessed the situation. "What do we have?" she asked one of the officers. The officer, looking harried, relayed the details. "Robbers came in through the service entrance. They disabled the security system and made off with a substantial amount of cash." Witnesses described 3 individuals, but we're still piecing together the full details. Detective Collins nodded, her expression determined. "Get me any surveillance footage you can find. We need to identify these suspects and track them down. They won't get far." Back in the black sedan, James navigated the twisting roads leading to the old warehouse. The vehicle's interior was filled with a tense silence, broken only by the occasional exchange of worried glances. The warehouse was located on a remote part of town, far from the immediate search areas. As they neared their destination, James's thoughts raced. The robbery had not gone as planned, and they were now facing the possibility of capture. The stakes were higher than ever, and every decision counted. The warehouse came into view, a dilapidated structure surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusting machinery. James pulled the sedan into a concealed spot behind the building and cut the engine. The group quickly exited the vehicle and made their way into the warehouse. Inside, the warehouse was dark and filled with the scent of aged wood and dust. Shafts of sunlight filtered through broken windows, casting eerie shadows on the floor. The place was a mess of old crates, tools, and forgotten equipment. It was the perfect place to lay low, at least for a while. James turned to David and Laura. "We need to sort out our next move. We've got the cash, but we're not out of the woods yet. We need to figure out our escape route and lay low until things calm down." David nodded, pulling out the duffel bag and opening it to reveal the stolen cash. "We have enough here to start over, but we need to get out of sight. The police will be scouring the area." Laura, her face pale from the stress, took out her phone to check for any news updates. "The police are already talking about the robbery on the local news. They're offering a reward for information leading to our capture." James frowned. "We need to be smart about this. We can't stay here for too long. We need to split up and lay low for a few days. I'll handle the transportation, but we need to find safe places to hide." The plan was to avoid detection while making arrangements for a safe escape. They needed to stay off the grid and avoid any further contact that could lead to their capture. Each member of the team was assigned a separate task to ensure their survival. James would arrange for a new set of fake identities and transportation to leave the state. David and Laura would find temporary hideouts and avoid any contact with the outside world until the heat died down. As they prepared to leave the warehouse, the distant sound of approaching sirens reminded them that time was running out. The team split up, each taking a different route to avoid drawing attention. James, with a grim determination, set off to put their escape plan into action. Detective Sarah Collins, back at the bank, received a call about the suspect's potential whereabouts. A tip-off had led them to the abandoned warehouse. She mobilized her team and set off in pursuit, determined to bring the robbers to justice. As the police closed in on the warehouse, the tension reached its peak. The heist had been a success in terms of execution, but the real challenge lay in evading capture and surviving the aftermath. The stakes had never been higher, and every move counted in the game of cat and mouse that had begun. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Crescent Falls stood silent, save for the faint echo of the approaching sirens. The once bustling town was now a scene of frenetic activity, as the police tightened their search for the robbers. James Walker, David, and Laura Mitchell had managed to evade capture so far, but the final confrontation was imminent. James was on the move, arranging for their escape while maintaining a low profile. He had found a reliable contact who could help them get out of the state and set them up with new identities. The plan was to get to a secluded location, switch vehicles, and head for a safe house. It was their last chance to escape the consequences of their actions. Meanwhile, David and Laura had taken refuge in separate hideouts, each one more concealed than the last. David was holed up in an old farmhouse on the edge of town, while Laura had found temporary shelter in an abandoned cabin deep in the woods. Both were anxious, but determined to follow through with their parts of the plan. Detective Sarah Collins, who had been diligently tracking the robbers' movements, received a tip-off about a potential sighting near the warehouse. As she and her team approached the location, they prepared for a confrontation. The meticulous planning of the heist was about to face its final test. The warehouse was dimly lit, with shadows dancing across the walls as the sun set. James's contact had arrived, a grizzled man with a stern expression who was ready to help James get out of town. The deal was struck, and James prepared to leave, but a nagging feeling of unease settled over him. Suddenly, the distant sound of police sirens grew louder. James's heart raced as he realized that the authorities were closing in. He knew that David and Laura might still be vulnerable if they were discovered. James made a split-second decision. He could not risk leaving his accomplices behind. He quickly grabbed the duffel bag filled with cash and headed toward the warehouse's exit. He knew the risk, but his loyalty to his team was unwavering. Inside the warehouse, Detective Collins and her team carefully moved in. They had received information that the suspects were likely to be at this location, and they were determined to bring the situation to a close. As James reached the warehouse exit, he heard the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. The police were closing in. He ducked behind a stack of crates, his mind racing. He had to find a way to warn David and Laura and get them out before it was too late. Detective Collins and her team entered the warehouse, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The area was eerily quiet, but the evidence of recent activity was clear. Collins's sharp eyes scanned the surroundings, looking for any sign of the suspects. James watched from his hiding spot, his heart pounding. He could see the police moving methodically through the warehouse, their presence a stark reminder of the urgency of their situation. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to David and Laura. "Cops are here. Get out now." David, who had been preparing to leave the farmhouse, received the message and immediately knew that time was running out. He grabbed the duffel bag, his hands shaking as he prepared to make his escape. He slipped out the back door and headed for a nearby wooded area, hoping to blend into the landscape. Laura, too, received the urgent message. She quickly gathered her belongings and made her way out of the cabin, her heart racing as she navigated through the dense forest. The trees provided some cover, but she knew that the police could still track her down. Back at the warehouse, James saw the police closing in on his position. He had to make a choice: stay and risk capture, or leave and hope his message reached his accomplices. He chose the latter. He made a break for the back exit, evading the police's attention with a combination of quick reflexes and careful timing. As James neared the rendezvous point with his contact, the police began to close in on the warehouse. Detective Collins's team searched the area thoroughly, but found only remnants of the heist. The suspects had managed to escape, but their trail was growing colder. James's contact had a getaway vehicle ready, and James climbed in, his mind racing with thoughts of his teammates. He hoped they had managed to evade capture. As the vehicle sped away from the warehouse, James glanced back at the fading lights of Crescent Falls, knowing that their lives had irrevocably changed. David and Laura, each in their respective locations, managed to evade the police. The search for them continued, but their well-planned escapes had given them a chance to disappear into the night. They were still free, but the price of their freedom was high. The heist had succeeded in terms of execution, but the cost of evading capture and the moral implications of their actions loomed large. The small town of Crescent Falls would never be the same, and the robbers' lives would forever be marked by the events that had unfolded. Detective Sarah Collins vowed to continue the search for the suspects, knowing that the trail was not entirely cold. The case was far from closed, and the pursuit of justice would continue. As the sun rose over Crescent Falls, James, David, and Laura faced an uncertain future. The thrill of the heist had come with consequences that they would have to live with. The final chapter of their story was one of escape and reflection, a reminder of the high stakes and the unpredictable nature of their chosen path.